Usual signs of climbers, parked trucks, boot prints, distant voices were nowhere to be found. Weather warnings had gone out the night before, clear and direct. A strong winter system was moving in fast, bringing heavy snow and dangerous winds. Most people listened. They stayed home. One man did not. He was an experienced climber in his late 40s, someone who had spent more of his life on mountains than talking about them. He wasn't reckless, and he wasn't trying to prove anything. He had climbed this route before more than once. It was familiar ground, and familiarity often builds a quiet confidence. He believed he could be in and out before the storm fully arrived. He moved steadily, not rushing, not lingering. His gear was practical, well used, and carefully checked. This wasn't an adventure for him. It was a routine climb meant to close a chapter before winter fully settled in. He had done harder routes in worse conditions, and he trusted his judgment more than distant forecasts. Still, the mountain felt different that day. The air was heavier, the silence deeper. Clouds hung low and thick, pressing against the upper slopes. The wind carried a sharp edge, cutting through layers meant to protect against cold. He noticed these things but didn't dwell on them. Experience had taught him that hesitation could be as dangerous as fear. As he climbed higher, the sense of isolation grew stronger. There was no movement around him, no signs of life. Just rock, snow, and the steady sound of his own breathing. The mountain wasn't hostile, but it wasn't welcoming either. He paused once, looking toward the ridge ahead. The sky had darkened faster than expected. Snow began to fall in light, scattered sheets, the kind that often comes before something worse. He considered turning back, but only briefly. He believed he still had time. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that this climb would not end the way it always had. By the time the storm fully arrived, the mountain would no longer be empty. And the decision to keep going would place him exactly where he needed to be. At the moment everything changed. The storm did not announce itself. It arrived the way dangerous things often do, quietly at first, then all at once. Snow that had been falling lightly thickened within minutes, turning the air white and heavy. The wind shifted direction, striking the mountainside with sudden force. What had been manageable conditions quickly became something else entirely. Visibility dropped to a few yards. Landmarks he had relied on before faded into nothing. The cold pushed through his gloves and into his hands, sharp and immediate. Each breath burned. The wind wasn't just loud, it was physical, pressing against him, stealing balance. Draining strength faster than expected, he stopped. Standing still in a storm like this was risky, but moving blindly was worse. He planted his feet, lowered his head, and took stock of where he was. His mind worked methodically, the way it always had in difficult situations. Panic would solve nothing. He checked his gear, his compass, his remaining daylight. Everything mattered now. This was no longer a climb. The goal was no longer the ridge or the route he had planned. The only objective left was to get off the mountain alive. Experience told him storms like this did not ease once they began. They closed in, tightened their grip, and punished hesitation. The cold crept deeper, settling into his muscles. Movements became slower, heavier. He recognized the signs, not fear, but fatigue setting in sooner than it should. He knew what that meant. Time was working against him now. He made the decision quickly and without drama. Turning back uphill wasn't an option. The wind was stronger there, the exposure worse. He needed to lose elevation, find shelter, and do it fast. He adjusted his pack, angled his body into the wind, and began moving downward, step by careful step. Each footfall mattered. A slip here could mean a fall he wouldn't recover from. Snow filled his tracks almost as soon as he made them, erasing his path behind him. The mountain had begun to close around him, sealing him into the storm. He didn't know how much time he had left. He only knew he had less than he thought, and that every decision from this point forward would carry weight. As he moved lower, something ahead caught his attention. At first, it was only a break in the snow, a shape that didn't match the rest of the storm-smoothed ground. He slowed his pace and leaned forward, squinting through the blowing white. Then he saw it clearly. Footprints. They were large, far larger than any human tracks he had ever seen on this mountain. Each print was deep, pressed hard into the snow, spaced in long, steady strides. These weren't random marks left by sliding or falling. They were deliberate, controlled, recent. He stopped again, feeling a tightness settle in his chest that had nothing to do with the cold. His first thought was practical. Perhaps another climber had come through earlier. But the size didn't fit. Neither did the spacing. No boots he knew of could leave impressions like these. And no person would be walking steadily in conditions that were already turning dangerous. He followed the line of tracks with his eyes as they disappeared into the swirling snow. They moved in the same direction he was heading, descending the mountain. Whatever had made them had been struggling too, pushing forward against the storm instead of retreating. The climber didn't feel fear. What he felt was confusion. He ran through possibilities, one by one. A bear made no sense at this elevation and this time of year. Equipment, snowshoes, some kind of mountaineering experiment, none of it added up. The rational explanations fell apart as quickly as he formed them. The wind howled around him, urging him to keep moving, but he stood there longer than he should have. Something about the tracks held him in place. Not curiosity alone, but a sense that they mattered. He realized then that he truly was not alone on the mountain. That understanding changed the air around him. The storm no longer felt like the only threat. There was something else out there, ahead of him, moving through the same cold, fighting the same wind. Whatever it was big. And it was vulnerable to the storm in the same way he was. He adjusted his grip on his poles and continued forward, following the direction of the tracks without fully deciding to. He told himself he was simply staying on the safest descent. But deep down, he knew that once he had seen those footprints, there was no turning away from what lay ahead. The tracks led him into a narrow stretch of terrain where the wind eased just enough to make movement possible. Snow still fell hard, but it no longer tore sideways across his face. He followed the prints cautiously, scanning the ground and the slope ahead, expecting at any moment for them to disappear. Instead, they grew deeper than he saw it at first. It was only a dark shape against the white something large lying still near a rock outcrop. The storm distorted its edges, making it difficult to judge distance or size. He slowed, heart steady but alert, every sense focused forward. As he moved closer, the shape became clearer. It was massive, broad across the shoulders, its body half covered by drifting snow. One long arm lay stretched out, fingers curled slightly, unmoving. The rise and fall of its chest was shallow, almost unnoticeable. He stopped several feet away. There was no mistaking it now. This was not an animal he recognized, and it was not human. The body was covered in thick, dark hair, matted with ice. The proportions were wrong for anything he knew. Too tall, too heavy, too still. The Bigfoot was alive, but barely. One of its legs was bent at an unnatural angle, pinned beneath its own weight. Frost clung to its fur. Its breathing was labored, each breath slow and strained, as if the cold itself were pressing down on its lungs. The climber felt a shift inside him, subtle but immediate. This was no encounter with something threatening. There was no charge, no roar, no movement at all. What lay in front of him was a living being caught in the same storm, losing a fight it could not win alone. For a brief moment, he considered backing away. Not out of fear, but caution. Whatever this creature was, it was powerful under different circumstances. But those circumstances were gone. The mountain had stripped it down to the same vulnerability he felt in his own bones. The wind picked up again, throwing snow across both of them. The climber knew then that standing still was no longer an option. If he did nothing, the storm would decide the outcome for both of them. The climber didn't hesitate. Years of experience had taught him that overthinking in moments like this could be deadly. He dropped to his knees in the snow, assessing the creature carefully. Its breathing was shallow but steady, and there was no sign of aggression, only exhaustion and pain. Whatever it was, it needed help, and he was the only one who could provide it. He stripped off his outer jacket, wrapping it gently around the creature's massive shoulders. The weight was far more than he expected, and his arms burned from the strain, but he held firm. Every movement had to be slow and deliberate. Sudden gestures could trigger panic, and in this situation, panic could be fatal. With a practiced hand, he adjusted the rope in his pack, tying it to a secure anchor point nearby. He looped it carefully around the creature, not to restrain it, but to stabilize it as he prepared to move it. The Bigfoot's dark eyes met his for a brief second. In them, there was fear, yes, but also something else: recognition, or perhaps understanding. It did not struggle. It allowed him to act step by step. He began to shift the creature toward a sheltered overhang, clearing rocks and loose snow out of the way. His muscles ached, his fingers stiffened from the cold, but he didn't stop. The wind continued to batter them, snow stinging both their faces, yet the climber maintained focus. He could feel the fragility of the moment, how easily it could all go wrong. One misstep, one slip, and the storm would claim them both. Yet in that silence, broken only by the howl of wind and shallow breaths, a quiet understanding formed. This was not a predator and prey, nor a human and monster. It was two living beings caught in the same fight against nature. And one had made a choice to help the other. By the time they reached the small rock ledge, that would serve as temporary shelter. The climber was breathing hard, sweat and frost mingling on his face. He sat down beside the creature, ensuring it was as comfortable as possible. For the first time, he allowed himself to acknowledge it fully. He had just made a decision that would change everything. The climber and the creature huddled under the small rock overhang. The storm raging relentlessly outside. Snow piled around them, drifting over the edges of their temporary shelter. But inside, the wind's bite was muted. The climber adjusted his jacket and backpack, creating a small insulated barrier against the cold. While keeping a careful eye on the Bigfoot, the creature lay still at first, conserving energy, its broad chest rising and falling slowly. It didn't speak, didn't growl, didn't make any sudden movement. Yet the climber could sense its awareness. Every so often, its dark eyes flicked toward him, a subtle acknowledgement of his presence, of his help. There was no gratitude expressed in words, none were needed, but the understanding was unmistakable. Hours passed. The storm never let up, but the rock overhang held, and the climber and the Bigfoot remained safe. He offered small gestures, a bit of water from his flask, careful repositioning to ease the creature's pinned leg. Each motion was deliberate, gentle, respectful. There was no rush, only the steady rhythm of survival and quiet attention. The night deepened, and with it came a strange calm. In the past, the climber had faced many storms, but never had he waded through one with another being so different, yet so connected to the same fragile struggle for life. The isolation of the mountain, the roar of the wind, the cold that gnawed at his fingers, all of it seemed to fade into the background as the storm and the stillness of the creature created a strange companionship. At one point, he caught himself watching the creature's breathing, noting the slight improvement in rhythm, the easing of tension in its massive shoulders. He realized that neither of them had spoken, yet an unspoken bond had formed. Survival was no longer just a personal endeavor. They were in this together, two lives intertwined by circumstance and quiet understanding. For the first time that day, the climber allowed himself to relax, even slightly. The storm was far from over, but for now, in this brief shelter, they had found safety. And in that safety, a connection formed, silent, calm, and profoundly human in its empathy. When dawn broke, the storm had finally eased. The whiteout that had dominated the mountain all night began to lift, leaving behind a quiet, almost ethereal light. Snow sparkled on every surface, softening the jagged rocks and filling the crevices with clean, untouched white. The wind had dropped to a gentle whisper, and the climber could finally see the path below more clearly. He turned to the Bigfoot, who had shifted slightly during the night. Its breathing was steadier, more measured. The stiffness in its limbs had lessened, and though it remained lying down, there was a noticeable improvement in its condition. The climber could see the frost melting slowly along the thick, dark fur, and a small rise and fall in the chest signaled life stronger than the night before. For a moment, neither moved. The silence was heavy, yet calm, filled only with the distant sound of shifting snow and occasional drip from overhanging ice. Then, almost imperceptibly, the creature lifted its head and looked at him. Its eyes, dark and intelligent, met his for the first time in full light. There was no fear now, only awareness, a quiet acknowledgement of the hours spent together and the shared endurance of the storm. The climber understood immediately. This was the moment of choice. The Bigfoot could leave. It could vanish into the forest below, free from the constraints of the storm and the climb. And yet it did not move. For a few long seconds, it simply stayed, a silent presence beside him. He watched it carefully, noting the slight flex of its fingers, the gentle tilt of its head, and the subtle shift in its posture. It was alive and it knew it, but it also seemed to understand something beyond survival. The bond formed in the dark hours had persisted, unspoken but real. Slowly, the creature rose on unsteady legs, testing its strength. The climber kept his distance, giving space, knowing the last thing it needed was interference. And then, in that quiet morning, the unthinkable happened. The Bigfoot remained. Not at his side exactly, but near enough that the connection remained intact. Neither spoke. Neither moved closer or farther. Yet in that moment, everything changed. The climber realized he had witnessed something rare, the quiet emergence of trust and understanding, born not from words or gestures, but from shared struggle. The mountain had given him a companion, and in return, he had given life. It was a morning that would alter the rest of his life in ways he had yet to comprehend. The Bigfoot paused at the edge of the clearing, massive frame silhouetted against the soft morning light. The climber held his breath, uncertain what the next moment would bring. For hours, they had survived together, connected by necessity, circumstance, and an unspoken understanding. Now, with the storm behind them and the mountain opening into clearer terrain, the creature had a choice. It could leave. For a long moment, it seemed as though it would. Its dark eyes swept over the climber, not with fear, but with recognition. Every muscle in its body tensed, then relaxed. Slowly, deliberately, it took a step forward, then another, moving toward the forest below. The climber felt a pang of loss, a quiet acknowledgement that this bond, however brief, might end here. But then something shifted. The Bigfoot stopped mid-step. Its head tilted slightly, as if reconsidering. It looked back at him, the depth in its gaze undeniable. There was no aggression. No threat, only awareness and choice. With a quiet deliberation, it turned and moved closer, stopping a few feet away. Maintaining a respectful distance, yet refusing to leave entirely, the climber exhaled softly, realizing the magnitude of what had just occurred. This was no fleeting interaction. It was a conscious decision, a mutual acknowledgement of trust. The storm had forced them together, but now, with danger fading, the bond persisted. The Bigfoot had chosen to stay not beside him exactly, but near enough that neither was truly alone. For the climber, the moment was surreal. He had faced countless storms, scaled peaks alone, and survived conditions that tested every skill he possessed. Yet nothing had prepared him for this, the quiet, deliberate choice of a creature most would consider myth. It did not speak, did not gesture, But its presence conveyed something far deeper than words could capture. As the morning sun cast a pale glow over the snowy slope, the climber understood a simple truth. Life on the mountain had changed. The storm had passed, yet its lessons remained. And somewhere in that silent bond, a connection had formed that would endure far beyond the mountain, far beyond the blizzard, far beyond the moment itself. From that morning onward, the Bigfoot stayed close. Not directly beside the climber, but always within view, sometimes just behind a ridge, sometimes in the shadow of a tree, watching with careful, deliberate attention. It never made a sound, never approached too quickly, but its presence was unmistakable. For the climber, the reassurance was immediate. He was no longer entirely alone on the mountain. Even when descending through difficult, exposed terrain, the journey down became a quiet partnership. The Bigfoot would shift slightly whenever the climber neared unstable snow or hidden rocks. At times it would pause, as if warning him, its massive form frozen in silent vigilance. The climber recognized the signs without explanation. No gestures were needed. Survival had created its own language between them. That it was clear, the creature understood more than just the storm's danger. It seemed aware of him as a companion, not just a helper. Every cautious step the climber took was mirrored by a watchful presence nearby, a constant reminder that he was not navigating the mountain alone. And yet, the Bigfoot maintained its independence, never demanding attention, never crossing boundaries. Its loyalty was quiet, measured, and entirely voluntary. As they moved down, the climber reflected on the hours spent together. He realized that the bond formed in crisis had persisted even as the immediate threat faded. The creature had survived the night in part because of him, but it had chosen to stay afterward, not out of necessity, but out of recognition. It was a conscious decision, a commitment that needed no words. By the time the mountain trail leveled into forested paths, the climber understood how profoundly his life had changed. He had faced countless challenges before, but never one like this. The presence of the Bigfoot was a quiet, constant lesson in trust, patience, and understanding. It had shown him a connection beyond human companionship, one forged in the harshest conditions and maintained through mutual respect. Even after reaching the safety of lower ground, the Bigfoot lingered. Not for attention, not for reward, but simply because it had chosen to remain. The climber knew he would never forget the presence that had silently guided, protected, and witnessed him. In a world where isolation often felt inevitable, he had discovered that bonds could form in silence, in snow, and in the stillness of shared survival. It was a lesson that would stay with him forever. Back in his ordinary life, the climber returned to routines that felt smaller, quieter, and somehow less significant after what had happened on the mountain. Friends and family asked about the trip, about the storm, and about the climb itself. He offered simple answers. He had made it down safely, that was all. He never mentioned the Bigfoot. Not because he doubted what he saw, but because some experiences are too profound, too delicate, to be shared casually. In the weeks that followed, he thought often about the creature. How it had survived the storm, how it had stayed near him afterward, how an unspoken bond had formed in the cold silence of the mountain. He understood now that some connections are not measured in words, gestures, or recognition. They exist quietly, resiliently, beneath the surface of understanding. He rarely spoke of it, but the memory never left him. He carried it with him on walks, in moments of solitude, and even in conversations that had nothing to do with the mountains. The encounter had changed him, not in ways that could be explained, but in ways that could be felt. He had seen trust, loyalty, and intelligence in a being most people dismissed as myth. That recognition lingered, a quiet reassurance in a world that often feels disconnected. Sometimes, when the wind picked up and snow lightly dusted the ground, he imagined the creature watching from afar. He knew it was not a human companion, but it had been present, silently guiding and protecting him when he needed it most. The experience had taught him to notice what is often overlooked, to recognize care, presence, and connection, even in unexpected forms. He never sought proof, photographs, or evidence. The story was his alone, held carefully in memory. And though he rarely told it, he knew one truth above all: bonds can be forged in silence, in the harshest conditions, and with the most unlikely of companions. Some lessons are meant to remain private, their weight and beauty preserved for those who truly understand them.